Welcome to Reformed Thinking. Today we're doing a deep dive into a topic that's really at the very heart of the gospel, global missions.
It really is, and we've got a stack of sources here that get into the real strategy of it all, the what, the why, and maybe most surprisingly, the how.
Yeah, the how. Because our mission for this conversation is to give you a clear framework for thinking about this. We want to sort through the difference between general evangelism and pioneering missions.
A huge difference, and one that changes everything.
It does. We also want to understand the scale of what's left to do, this idea of people groups, and get to the bottom of this incredible claim from guys like David Livingstone who said, "I never made a sacrifice." That just seems, on the face of it, unbelievable.
It does, but it's central to the whole motivation. To get there, though, we have to start with the terms. We have to be super clear on what we're talking about. If we mix up two different jobs, we can't ever, plan properly or even know when we're done.
Okay, so let's start there. Let's unpack this distinction that the sources make between missions,
Right.
specifically frontier missions, and evangelism. I think most of us use those words pretty much interchangeably.
We do, and that's the problem. Strategically, they're not the same at all, and it all hinges on whether the job is, finishable.
Okay, so which one is which?
Let's start with evangelism, because that's what most of us are familiar with. Evangelism is the ongoing work of sharing the gospel inside a culture where a church is already up and running.
Right, so you've got local churches, you've got pastors who speak the language, you have a Christian community that exists.
Exactly. Think about North America or Europe or South Korea. The church is there. It might be small, it might be struggling, but it exists. And because new people are always being born and there are always unbelievers in that culture,
The work is never done.
it's never done. It's a continuous task. You might have a huge revival, but you still have to share the gospel with the next generation. That work continues right up until Christ returns.
So that's evangelism, the ongoing work of an established local church.
Right. But frontier missions is a totally different animal. It has a unique strategic purpose to cross barriers, language barriers, cultural barriers, to get into a people group where there is no church, and to plant one.
So it's about starting from scratch.
It's pioneering work. It's about establishing a beachhead for the gospel where none exists, so that an indigenous church can then take over that continuous task of evangelism we just talked about.
Ah, okay. So that distinction. That's what lets us talk about something called closure in missions, the idea that the job could actually be completed.
That's it. And you see this perfectly with the Apostle Paul. I mean, he was the model pioneer missionary.
Right. If he was just a general evangelist, he would have just stayed in one place, right? Like Corinth, where he saw a ton of success.
Exactly. He would have stayed there for 40 years trying to convert every last person. But that's not what he did. He had a different goal.
He lays it out in Romans 15. He says his ambition was to preach the gospel where Christ wasn't known, so he wouldn't be building on someone else's foundation.
Yeah. Think about that. He's a strategist. He's looking at the map. And then he says something that's just. It's an incredible statement. He says that from Jerusalem all the way to Illyricum, that's modern-day Albania, he has fulfilled the ministry of the gospel.
Which is just a massive area of land in so many different cultures. How could he possibly say it was fulfilled? I mean, there must have been thousands, maybe millions of people there who still didn't believe.
Of course there were. He didn't mean every single person was saved. He meant the pioneering task was done.
The planting.
The planting was done. He had crossed the barriers. He had established functioning churches with local leaders. He had lit the fire. And now those local churches were responsible for fanning the flames.
So for him, the mission in that region was complete. He could actually say, I have no more room for work here, and start planning his next move to Spain.
That's the strategic mind of a pioneer. Once a viable evangelizing church is planted, his job there is over. The responsibility shifts to the local believers to do the ongoing work of evangelism.
And that framework changes everything. It means the Great Commission, making disciples of all the ethne, all the peoples, is a task that has an end point.
It does. Once every people group has a healthy, reproducing church, the job of frontier missions is technically over. The work of evangelism, of course, will go on forever, but the specific cross-cultural pioneering task will be finished.
That reframes the entire effort. It's not a black hole of endless need. It's a specific, achievable goal.
And that brings us to the next point. If the goal is to plant a church in every ethne, what exactly is an ethne?
Right. We've defined the task. Now we have to define the target. For a long time, people heard nations in the Great Commission and thought of, political countries.
Sure. Go to France, go to Japan, go to Brazil. But the sources are really clear that we have to think much smaller, much more specifically than that.
From political nations to people groups, why is that shift so vital?
Because God's plan of redemption, as you see it in the Bible, is way more detailed than our modern maps. You look at a verse like Revelation 7:9, and the crowd in heaven comes from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages.
So it's not enough to just have a Christian from India, for example.
Not even close.
Yeah.
Because India isn't one people, it's thousands of distinct people groups. Thousands of different languages, castes, tribes, cultures, many of whom have never even heard the gospel, even though there's a huge church in other parts of India.
So a people group is a distinct cultural or linguistic unit, and that's the real target for frontier missions, not just a spot on a map.
Precisely. We're trying to reach every one of those distinct units. But as you can imagine, actually defining and counting them gets really complicated.
Yeah, the sources mention that. It's not a simple checklist.
No, not at all. A guy named Ralph Winter, who is a huge thinker in this area, he pointed out that it's almost impossible to draw these perfect, clean lines between a nation, a tribe, a people, and a language.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. Think about Bible translation. You might create one written translation for a language that covers a really big area, and you think, okay, great, one people group reached.
Right.
But then you realize that many of the people in that area don't read, so you decide to make audio recordings of the Bible. And you suddenly discover that to be understood, you don't need one recording, you need 8, because the spoken dialects are that different.
Wow. So what looked like one group is actually 8, just based on the barrier to communication.
Exactly. The real question is, can the gospel spread naturally within that group without hitting a major cultural or language wall? If it can't, you're likely dealing with 2 different people groups. A people group is truly reached only when the local believers can do the evangelism themselves without needing an outside translator or cultural guide.
So given how messy that is, how do we even begin to count the remaining work? What do the numbers look like?
Well, the numbers are estimates, and they're always being refined as we get more information, just like Winter predicted.
Yeah.
But the data we have it's sobering. Back in 1998, the estimate was around 13,000 distinct ethno-linguistic peoples in the world. And of those, about 3,500 were considered pioneer fields, basically totally unreached.
And I'm guessing that number went up as we learned more.
It did. By 2010, the total count was over 16,500 people groups, with more than 6,800 of them classified as unreached.
Over 6,800.
Yeah. But the really gut-wrenching number is the population. We're talking about approximately 2 billion people.
2 billion.
2 billion people who live in groups where there's no indigenous church strong enough to evangelize their own people. They will likely be born, live, and die without ever hearing the name of Christ.
That figure. 2 billion. That should completely reorient how the global church thinks about its resources and its priorities.
It should. And what's interesting is that this massive population isn't just spread out evenly across the globe. It's heavily, heavily concentrated in one specific region of the world.
The 1040 window.
The 1040 window. It's crucial for anyone thinking strategically about this to know what that is.
So let's define it.
Okay, so picture a map of the world. The 1040 window is a rectangle. It stretches horizontally from West Africa, across North Africa, through the Middle East, all the way to East Asia.
And vertically.
Vertically, it's the area between 10 degrees and 40 degrees north of the equator.
And the people inside that box.
They are, by and large, the least reached people in the world. The populations are primarily Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, and animist. This is the heartland of the world's major non-Christian religions, and it's where the vast majority of those 6,800 unreached people groups live.
So it provides a focus. It turns this overwhelming global task into a tangible, concentrated challenge.
It does, but it's also the area of the world that is historically the most resistant to the gospel.
Which makes the task look, well, from a human point of view, it looks impossible.
Yeah.
How do you look at 2 billion people locked behind these huge cultural and political walls and not just fall into despair?
And that brings us right to the theological engine that has to drive this whole thing. You have to start with the urgency, but you have to be sustained by something much bigger than human ability.
The urgency comes from the belief that this work is, as the sources put it, utterly essential. That without the gospel, people are truly without hope.
That conviction is the fuel. This isn't just a nice cultural exchange program. The core belief here is that the gospel of Christ is the only thing that can free people from sin. The aim is conversion to Christ because the Bible is uncompromising on this point. Acts 4.12, there is salvation in no one else.
And holding to that puts you at odds with some other theological views out there, views that the sources say have really hurt the missions effort over the years.
They've done huge damage, because if you lose that sense of urgency, if you lose the conviction that people are lost without Christ, the drive for frontier missions it evaporates.
What kind of views were we talking about?
Well, the idea, which you find among some leaders in mainline denominations, for instance, that all people and all religions are sort of already living in God's grace and will be saved by his mercy, regardless of what they believe.
Sometimes called inclusivism, or the idea of the anonymous Christian.
Exactly. The belief that you can be saved by Christ without ever actually hearing about him or putting your faith in him. The sources quote one Catholic sister who said the commission to save souls isn't necessary because they are already in the love and grace of God.
If that's true, then the Apostle Paul's entire life was a tragic misunderstanding.
Completely. Think of his commission in Acts 26. He was sent to open their eyes so that they may turn from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God. That's a rescue mission. It implies a radical change of state, a turning from one kingdom to another. If they're already fine, that mandate is just empty words.
And you can see the results of these beliefs in the numbers. The sources note that as these inclusivist ideas grew in some denominations, their missionary force just plummeted.
It did. While at the same time, the missionary forces of evangelical groups, the ones holding firmly to the necessity of conversion, grew by over 200%. Your theology dictates your actions.
Okay, so the urgency is clear. But that still leaves us with the overwhelming scale. 2 billion people. How do you even begin? That's where the hope has to come from somewhere else.
This is where Reformed theology provides what the sources call the perfect missionary medicine. It's God's sovereignty. It's Jesus' own words in Mark 10. With man it is impossible, but not with God, for all things are possible with God.
The task of converting a heart is not something a human can do anyway. You can't argue someone out of spiritual bondage.
You can't. It is a divine supernatural act, and the missionary's hope rests on the fact that God himself does what we cannot. He is the one who creates the faith that saves. We often call this the irresistible call or efficacious grace.
That's from Romans 8.30. Those whom he called, he also justified. The call isn't just an invitation that can be rejected. It's a creative, powerful summons.
It is infallibly effective. The sources use the analogy of Jesus calling Lazarus out of the tomb. Lazarus was dead. He had zero ability to respond. But when the voice of God said, "Lazarus, come out," that call created the life and the will to obey.
So the pressure isn't on the missionary's persuasive ability. The burden is on God's power.
Exactly. Which is the antidote to despair. You look at a village that's been resistant for 100 years, and you know that God can change that in an instant. But it's also the antidote to pride. When success comes, the missionary can't take the credit. They can only say what Paul said, that it was what Christ has accomplished through me.
This confidence must be what Jesus meant in John 10 when he said, "I have other sheep that are not of this fold. I must bring them also."
That verse is a lifeline for missionaries on hard fields. Christ is saying, I already have chosen people in that unreached group, and it is a divine necessity that I gather them. They will listen to my voice.
It's the same thing God told Paul in Corinth when he was afraid. "I have many in this city who are my people."
Yes. It's a guarantee from the commander-in-chief that the battle is already won. The missionary isn't fighting for victory. They're fighting from victory. That truth that all things are possible with God is what keeps them going.
Okay, so if God's sovereignty provides the hope and the confidence, let's talk about the motivation. This is where things get really counterintuitive with this idea of Christian hedonism.
It is. That term itself can really throw people off. Hedonism sounds selfish, right? The pursuit of pleasure.
Yeah, exactly. How can you connect that with missions, which seems to be all about giving things up? Comfort, safety, family?
Because it redefines what the greatest pleasure actually is. The whole idea is that the deepest, most lasting, most satisfying joy you can ever experience is found by giving your life completely over to God's global cause.
So it's not about pursuing cheap worldly pleasure, it's about pursuing the highest pleasure, which is found in God's will.
That's it. Lottie Moon, the missionary to China, said it perfectly. Surely there can be no greater joy than that of saving souls. It's not a sacrifice. It's a trade-up.
And this isn't just a clever idea. The sources point directly to Jesus' own teaching on this, the 100-fold promise.
Right. Peter comes to Jesus and says, with a bit of a sacrificial tone, "See, we have left everything and followed you."
He's looking for a pat on the back.
He is. And Jesus' response is amazing. He says, "Truly, No one who has left house or family or lands for my sake and the gospel's will fail to receive 100-fold now in this time.
Now, not just in heaven.
Now. And what do you get? Houses and brothers and sisters and mothers and children and lands with persecutions. And then, in the age to come, eternal life.
So let's be clear about the compensation. He's not promising that if you give up one house, you'll become a real estate mogul with 100 houses.
No, absolutely not. The 100-fold return is spiritual and relational. It's found in the fellowship of the global church, and above all, in the felt presence of Christ himself.
So if you give up the affection of your mother, you gain 100 times that affection from Christ and from spiritual mothers all over the world in the family of God.
That's the idea. If you lose your sense of a physical home, you gain 100 times the security in knowing that your Lord owns everything and that the entire church is your home. The spiritual gain is exponentially greater than the material loss.
And that phrase, with persecutions, is key. He's not promising an easy life.
No, he's including the suffering as part of the deal. But the idea is that it's in the midst of those persecutions that the presence of Christ and the reality of that 100-fold spiritual family becomes most real, most tangible.
So self-denial isn't about giving things up for the sake of being miserable. It's about denying yourself a lesser, good-like temporary comfort for a far, far greater good. It's a joyful calculation.
It is. It completely removes self-pity from the equation. When a missionary understands this, they can't really talk about sacrifice anymore because they know they're getting the better end of the deal by a long shot.
And the proof is in the lives of the missionaries who endured the most. You already mentioned David Livingstone.
Livingstone. I mean, the man was sick for years, attacked, separated from his family, and yet he's the one who says, "I never made a sacrifice."
It's just an astonishing statement. How did he explain that?
He saw it as a privilege. He said the reward was immediate. It was found in the consciousness of doing good, peace of mind, and a bright hope. The suffering was nothing, he said, compared to the glory and the joy of the work.
Then you have someone like John G. Patton who lost his wife and child just after arriving on the field. The absolute worst-case scenario.
And Patton's story is the perfect example of the with persecutions clause. He tells of a time he was hiding up in a tree all night long with hostile natives below looking to kill him.
Utterly alone.
But he said he wasn't alone. He wrote that Christ was nearer to him in that tree than any human friend had ever been. Alone, yet not alone. That experience of Christ's presence was the 100-fold gain, right there in his darkest moment.
And Samuel Zwemer in the Middle East, losing 2 of his daughters to sickness.
Yes. And 50 years later, looking back, he said, "Gladly would I do it all over again." This isn't denial. This is from a man who had counted the cost and found the gain to be infinitely greater.
It's the same logic Paul uses in Philippians 3. He says everything he used to value, he now counts as loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus, my Lord.
It's all about that valuation, which leads to this other interesting analogy the sources use. The missionary, not as a hero, but as an invalid in Christ's sanatorium.
Okay, that sounds strange. An invalid.
It's a way to cultivate humility. The missionary doesn't go because they're spiritually strong and they're going to go fix everybody else. They go because they, like all of us, are spiritually sick.
And the mission field is the treatment.
The mission field is the clinic. All the hardships, the loneliness, the cultural stress, the disappointments, that's the medicine God uses to heal them, to make them more dependent on him, to make them more like Christ.
That view,
Yeah.
it prevents pride, doesn't it? Because you know that any success is from God, and even the difficulties are for your own good.
It does. It makes them better missionaries because they're not relying on themselves. They're just recipients of grace, which makes the whole thing a pursuit of their own deepest joy and health.
So let's bring this all together. We've defined the task as this finishable, pioneering work. We've grounded the hope in God's sovereignty and the motivation in this 100-fold joyful return. Let's talk about the finish line.
Oh, yeah, that's the exciting part. We have this guarantee in Matthew 24:14 from Jesus himself. This gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. It's a promise. The task will be finished.
For centuries, it didn't look that way. Progress was incredibly slow.
It was, but something shifted dramatically in the second half of the 20th century. The momentum toward closure started to accelerate in a way it never had before.
Driven by what?
A few things. One was that massive increase in evangelical missionaries we talked about, the people who really believed this was an urgent rescue mission. Another is the explosive growth of the church in the global south.
So it's not just Westerners going out anymore.
Not at all. You have massive sending movements from places like South Korea, Brazil, Nigeria, and then, of course, you have technology. Bible translation that used to take a lifetime can now be done in a fraction of the time.
And communication allows for training leaders in closed countries in ways that were impossible 30 years ago.
All of this is speeding things up, and this sense of momentum, this idea that the end is in sight, is what led someone like Ralph Winter to challenge our whole cultural idea of retirement.
He was pretty forceful on this point. He called retirement a virulent disease.
He did. His logic was simple. We're in a war. You don't take your most experienced soldiers off the field in the middle of a war.
He asked those piercing questions. Did Moses retire? Did Paul retire? Peter, John.
No, because if the greatest joy is found in serving God's global cause, then to retire from that is to retire from joy itself. He urged people, especially older believers with a lifetime of experience and resources, to pour their final years into finishing the task.
This kind of glad, lifelong obedience has historical models. The sources mention the Moravians.
The Moravians are just an incredible story. Starting way back in 1732, long before the modern missions movement, they just started sending people everywhere with what was called utter abandon.
And it wasn't a grim duty for them?
Not at all. It was a joyful, spontaneous overflow of their love for Christ. They famously sold themselves into slavery just to get access to enslaved populations in the West Indies. That's how much they believed in the necessity of the task and the joy of obedience.
That's a level of dedication that's hard to comprehend.
It is, and you see that same spirit in someone like Peter Cameron Scott, who founded the Africa Inland Mission. He went to Africa, got sick, lost his brother, and had to go home completely discouraged.
Ready to give up.
Ready to give up. But he went to Westminster Abbey and knelt at David Livingstone's tomb, and he read the inscription there, which included the words from John 10:16. Other sheep I have, them also I must bring. Christ's words. And it hit him. This whole enterprise doesn't depend on his health or his strength. It depends on Christ's divine necessity to gather his people. And he got up, went back to Africa, and started a mission that reached millions.
So for us today, what does this look like? Not everyone can go.
No, but this is where the concept of being a world Christian comes in.
A term coined by David Bryant. What does that mean?
It means you reorder your entire life, your budget, your career, your free time, your prayers around God's global cause. You accept personal responsibility to see that the unreached are reached.
So you accept the mandate that among every people group where there is no vital church, there should be one, there must be one, there shall be one.
Yes, and you figure out your role in making that happen. Maybe you do go, or maybe you become a strategic giver. Or you use your professional skills in IT or medicine or education to support those on the front lines. It means aligning your life with God's global purpose.
It's about aligning your personal pursuit of joy with God's plan for the world.
That's it.
So this deep dive has really clarified a few things for us. First, that frontier missions is this specific, finishable task of planting the church among the unreached, which is different from the ongoing work of evangelism.
And that this humanly impossible task is only possible because of God's sovereignty. His power to call his other sheep is the only thing that gives us confidence when we look at those 2 billion people.
And finally, that answering this call isn't about sacrifice. It's about a rational, joyful pursuit of the greatest satisfaction we can know, the 100-fold spiritual return that Christ himself guarantees.
The momentum is building. The task is doable. And it challenges all of us to rethink how we use the time and resources we've been given.
It really does. It reframes our entire lives, not around a courageous sacrifice, but around the pursuit of ultimate joy. As you think about your own life, your own comforts and goals, maybe the best way to end is to weigh them against the calculus of Jim Elliot, who was martyred bringing the gospel to the Auca people in Ecuador. His credo was simple, but it changes everything.
He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose.
No.